In rural Tennessee, a couple living out of a tent found a half-collapsed tobacco barn in the middle of nowhere. The back half of the structure was gone, caved in under years of weather. But the front loft was still standing. 6 weeks and $287 later, a Habitat for Humanity volunteer walked into that loft and forgot she was standing inside a barn. It looked like a cabin. These are 10 abandoned spaces across America that homeless people turned into fully running homes for under $500. Number 1. The Forgotten Greenhouse. Behind a foreclosed estate in upstate New York, hidden past an overgrown driveway that nobody had driven down in 3 years, there was a greenhouse, not a small hobby kit from the hardware store. This was a full glass panel structure, maybe 20 feet long and 12 feet wide, with a concrete floor and a built-in rainwater collection system that somehow still worked. The bank that technically owned the property had never sent a single person to check on it. A woman named Donna, 62 years old, found it while cutting through the property one winter afternoon. She was carrying everything she owned in 2 garbage bags. The greenhouse was full of weeds and dead plants, but the glass panels were intact and the floor was dry. She cleaned it out over 3 days. She pulled the old wooden planting tables together to build a raised sleeping platform off the cold concrete floor, and she hung blankets over the glass panels that faced the road so nobody driving past could see inside. Those glass panels acted as a passive solar heater. On sunny days, even in January in upstate New York, the temperature inside would climb 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the air outside. Donna spent about $90 total, mostly on blankets and a small propane heater for the worst nights. That greenhouse became her home for nearly 2 years. But that was just the first space on this list. And the next one is something that happens in almost every city in America. Number 2, the abandoned storage unit. A woman we will call Marie, a 55-year-old former home health aide from Phoenix, Arizona, lost her apartment after the agency she worked for cut her hours to almost nothing. She spent 2 weeks sleeping behind a grocery store before she found a self-storage facility on the edge of town where a row of ground-level units had been sitting empty for over a year. The locks were broken. The roll-up doors were hanging open. One unit, about 10 feet by 15 feet, still had a concrete floor in decent shape and a door that actually closed all the way. Marie started with what she could find for free. She got foam board insulation from a construction site dumpster 3 blocks away. She lined the walls with it, securing the panels with duct tape and a handful of screws. She found a mattress on a curb on trash day and dragged it inside. 2 rechargeable battery lanterns from a dollar store, $8. A battery-powered fan, $12. A shelf system made from milk crates she collected behind a convenience store. Total cost for the entire setup came in at just under $60. Within a week, Marie had a door that locked, a dry floor, a bed, light, and airflow. It was not luxury, but for a woman who had been sleeping in the open air in the Phoenix heat, it was the difference between surviving and actually having a life. If that story hit you, this next one is going to hit harder, because this space did not just give 2 people shelter, it gave them a way out. Number 3, the condemned school bus. Under a highway overpass outside of Memphis, Tennessee, there was a yellow school bus that had been sitting on flat tires for what neighbors estimated was at least 5 years. The county had tagged it for removal, but never followed through. A couple in their late 40s, both unemployed and sleeping in their car after an eviction, pulled under that overpass during a rainstorm one night and noticed the bus sitting there in the dark. They spent 3 days removing the seats by hand. They built a plywood sleeping platform using wood from a demolished fence nearby. Curtains sewn from bed sheets bought at Goodwill for $3 each went up over the windows. A small propane camp stove sat on the old driver's dashboard area, and that became their kitchen. Aluminum foil and cardboard covered the windows for privacy and insulation. Total cost of the conversion, around $140. They lived in that bus for over a year. And during that time, both of them found part-time work and eventually saved enough to move into a shared apartment. That bus was a bridge. It was literally parked under one, and it was the thing that carried them from one life to the next. However, this next space might be the most cleverly converted one on the entire list. Number 4. The decommissioned highway toll booth. When a stretch of highway in rural Ohio switched over to electronic tolling, the old manual toll booths were left standing. One of them, about 8 feet by 6 feet with a small overhang, had been built with poured concrete walls and still had electrical conduit running to it, even though the power had been disconnected years earlier. A former Marine named Angela found it while walking along the highway shoulder. She had been homeless for 7 months after her landlord sold the building she lived in and gave everyone 30 days to leave. Angela cleaned out the toll booth, sealed the cracks in the concrete with $4 worth of caulk from a hardware store, and installed a small window vent she built from screen material and duct tape. She brought in a cot, a cooler, and a battery lantern. Then came the clever part. Angela, who had picked up some electrical knowledge during her time in the Marines, ran an extension cord from an exterior outlet at a nearby rest stop bathroom. That gave her enough power for a phone charger, a small fan, and a reading lamp. Total spend, about $110. She lived there for 5 months before a veteran housing program connected her with a studio apartment. And honestly, the ingenuity in that story alone is impressive. But this next one, number 5, is the one I mentioned at the very beginning. And it is on a completely different level. Number 5. The collapsed barn loft in rural Tennessee. About 40 minutes from the nearest town, in a stretch of eastern Tennessee where the hills go on forever, there was an old tobacco barn that had partially collapsed. The back half of the structure was gone, folded in on itself under the weight of years of snow and rain. But the front section, including the loft, was still standing. That loft was about 16 feet by 12 feet with a sloped roof, a solid wood floor, and wooden walls on 3 sides. The fourth side, where the barn had collapsed, was wide open to the weather. A couple in their mid-50s, both out of work and living in a tent on public land, found the barn while foraging for firewood. What they did over the next 6 weeks is the part that is hard to believe without seeing it. They rebuilt the entire open wall using reclaimed lumber pulled from the collapsed section of the barn itself. They framed it, sheathed it with old planking, and sealed it with roofing tar they bought for $19 a bucket. They built a wood-burning stove from a 55-gallon steel drum, cut a door into the front of it with a hacksaw, and vented the smoke through the roof with stovepipe they found at a farm auction for $8. They installed a rainwater catchment system using gutters pulled from the collapsed section and a food-grade barrel they got for free from a restaurant. A solar-powered LED light hung from the ceiling beam. The sleeping area had a queen mattress on a pallet frame, covered in quilts donated by a neighbor who discovered what they were doing and decided to help instead of calling the authorities. They built a small porch at the loft entrance using barn wood and hung a screen door they found at a roadside giveaway pile. They had a functioning wood stove for heat, a rainwater system for water, solar lighting, a cooking area with a camp stove and cast iron skillet, food storage in sealed bins, and a front door that locked. Total cost, $287. They lived in that barn loft for over 3 years before a local Habitat for Humanity chapter connected them with permanent housing. The volunteer who visited them said that when she walked into the loft for the first time, she genuinely forgot she was standing in a barn. It felt like a cabin because it was a home. And that story is a perfect example of something that most people do not want to think about. A lot of the people in these videos are not people who failed. They are people who got hit by one bad month, one medical bill, one landlord decision, and had nowhere to catch themselves on the way down. This next story is the one that gets to me the most. Number 6. The abandoned church fellowship hall. In a small town in West Virginia, a Baptist church that had served the community for over 80 years finally closed when the congregation dwindled to fewer than 10 members. The building sat empty, but the fellowship hall in the basement still had a working kitchen with running water, a gas stove, and a large open room with a tile floor. The last pastor, before he left town, quietly handed the key to a family he knew was living in their car. A mother, a father, and 2 children under 10. They moved in with almost nothing. The church kitchen became their actual kitchen. The fellowship hall became their bedroom and living room. Community members who heard about the situation donated a pair of mattresses, a couch, a small television, and bags of groceries. The family patched a leak in the basement ceiling with roofing tar, replaced a broken window pane with a piece of plexiglass and silicone, and cleaned the entire space from floor to ceiling. Their total out-of-pocket cost was less than $50. They lived there for nearly 18 months while the father found steady work at a nearby factory and the mother enrolled in a job training program. That church, which could not save itself, saved a family. And that right there is why these stories matter. Because for every person on this list, the space was never the point. The point was having a door to close behind them, a place to be still, a place to figure out what comes next. Now I want to stop here for a moment. A lot of the people you are hearing about in this video are veterans, or they are people who are one bad month away from losing everything. I put together a free guide called The Veteran's Blueprint that goes deeper into the programs, the resources, and the step-by-step strategies that people in these situations are actually using to get back on their feet. If that sounds like something you or someone you know could use, the link is right below this video in the description. It is completely free. If these stories are landing the way they landed with me, hit subscribe. I cover stories like this every week, and the next one is going to be one you do not want to miss. Number 7. The shipping container on the dead rail siding. Now, the next space on this list takes us to the Arizona desert, and the man who built it was an Army mechanic who served 2 tours overseas. Outside of Tucson, Arizona, on an abandoned rail spur that had not seen a train in over a decade, there was a row of old shipping containers that a logistics company had left behind after going bankrupt. One 40-foot container still had its doors, and the lock hasp was intact. A veteran named James, 51, found it while following the railroad tracks through the desert, looking for scrap metal to sell. James borrowed an angle grinder from a friend at a day labor site and cut 2 window openings on opposite sides of the container for cross-ventilation. He framed the openings with scrap wood and covered them with heavy-gauge plastic sheeting that he could roll up or down depending on the desert weather. He lined the interior walls with pallet wood he pulled apart by hand, which added insulation against the Arizona heat and made the space feel less like a metal box and more like an actual room. He set up a rain barrel outside the container that collected water from the roof, gravity-fed through a garden hose into a 5-gallon bucket inside. That was his water system for washing, drinking after boiling, and cooking. His bed was a wooden platform built from the same pallets, topped with a foam pad from a thrift store. A propane camp stove sat on a plywood shelf. A scrapyard wood-burning stove vented through a hole in the ceiling kept him warm through the desert winter nights, which get colder than most people expect. Total investment, around $270. James lived in that shipping container for nearly 3 years. But while James had the desert heat to manage, the woman in this next story had a completely different problem. She needed to feel safe. Number 8. The shuttered motel on the bypassed highway. When the interstate rerouted traffic away from a 2-lane highway in rural New Mexico, the small businesses along the old route started closing one by one. A 12-room motel was one of the last to go. The owner walked away, and the property sat in foreclosure limbo for years, slowly crumbling in the desert sun. A woman named Patricia, 44 years old, arrived at that motel with her teenage daughter after fleeing a domestic situation with nothing but a duffel bag and $200 in cash. Most of the motel rooms were destroyed. Broken windows, collapsed ceilings, mold on every wall. But room number 7, on the end of the building, was somehow still intact. The door locked from the inside. The window glass was unbroken. And when Patricia turned the bathroom faucet, water came out. Not hot water, but water. The toilet flushed. The pipes were still connected to the municipal line, and nobody had ever bothered to shut them off. She bought a small solar panel at a yard sale for $35, just big enough to trickle charge a car battery, which powered a small LED lamp and a phone charger. She and her daughter cleaned that room top to bottom with bleach and rags. A mattress from a thrift store cost $20. Pots and pans came from a church donation box. They cooked on a hot plate powered by the solar setup when the battery had enough charge, and used a camp stove the rest of the time. Total cost for the full setup was around $160. For Patricia, that motel room was not just a place to sleep. It was the first door she could lock with her daughter safe on the other side of it. Think about that for a second. That is what home actually means when you strip away everything else. Number 9, the storm drain maintenance alcove. And that brings us to a story that is harder to hear but important. In Las Vegas, Nevada, there is a vast network of storm drain tunnels beneath the city. Journalists and documentary crews have covered these tunnels for years because during the dry months, they become home to hundreds of people. Most of them sleep on the concrete floor of the main drainage channel, exposed to flash flood risks and wind. But one man, a former Navy corpsman in his early 60s, found something different. It was a maintenance alcove built into the wall of a secondary tunnel, about 3 feet above the main floor of the drain. It was roughly 8 feet deep and 6 feet wide, with a flat concrete shelf and a steel access door that no longer had a lock. He walled off the front opening with cinder blocks he carried in one by one from a demolished building at street level above. He left a gap for a doorway and hung a heavy tarp over it. Inside, he laid a foam mattress on the concrete shelf, hung a battery lantern from a hook he drilled into the ceiling, and stored his belongings in sealed plastic bins to keep them dry. Because the alcove was elevated above the drain floor, even during a flash flood event when water rushed through the main channel, the water would pass beneath his sleeping area. He told an outreach volunteer that he chose that specific alcove because of his military training in reading terrain and water flow patterns. The total cost was about $75 in materials. He had been living there for over 3 years when a documentary crew filming in the Las Vegas tunnel system found him. That kind of tactical thinking, that level of survival instinct, it does not come from nowhere. It comes from training. And this last story, number 10, comes from someone with that exact same background. Number 10, the railroad utility car. On a dead spur line outside Chattanooga, Tennessee, sitting in tall grass where the tracks had rusted over, there was an old railroad maintenance car. Not a boxcar, but a smaller enclosed utility car that had been used to store track repair equipment. It was about 20 feet long and 8 feet wide, with steel walls that were already insulated with fiberglass batting to protect the equipment from temperature swings. The doors still latched, and the floor was solid steel plate. A woman named Linda found it while walking the tracks one afternoon. She was 54, a former Army supply specialist who had done 2 deployments. After losing her warehouse job, she had been sleeping in a tent in the woods for 4 months. The utility car already had the bones of a shelter, insulated walls, a solid roof, doors that closed tight. Linda spent 3 weeks converting it into something livable. She framed out a sleeping area with scrap lumber, built a small table and shelf unit, and installed a wood-burning stove she bought at a scrapyard for $40. She cut a hole in the roof for the stovepipe and sealed it with metal flashing and high-temperature caulk. She covered the steel floor with carpet remnants from a flooring store that was throwing away scraps, and she rigged a 12-volt battery system with a small solar panel for light. Total cost of the entire conversion was around $210. Linda lived in that railroad car for over 2 years, through Tennessee summers and winters. She told a volunteer outreach worker that it was the safest she had felt since leaving the Army. And that is the thing about every single story on this list. None of these people were looking for anything fancy. They were not dreaming about granite countertops or open floor plans. They wanted 4 walls, a dry place to sleep. And when nobody gave them that, they built it themselves for under $500. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, over 35,000 veterans are sleeping outside on any given night in the United States. People who signed up, served, came home, and somehow ended up with nothing. And the spaces they are converting, the storage units and toll booths and shipping containers and railroad cars, those are not signs of people who gave up. They are signs of people who refuse to stop fighting, even after the country they fought for stopped fighting for them. If you want to go deeper into the programs and strategies that are actually helping people in these situations, the Veterans Blueprint is free, and the link is right below this video in the description. I will see you in the next one.